James Mitchell thought the massive white horse, surrounded by 30 collapsed foals on the dead road, was a heat mirage until he saw their ribs jutting through their skin and realized they'd been left to die. He had no cell signal, barely any water, and the man who abandoned them was already hunting to make sure no witnesses survived. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The desert highway stretched endlessly into the horizon, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the barren landscape like a scar on forgotten land. Heat waves shimmered in the distance, creating mirages that danced and disappeared as quickly as they formed. This was Route 247, a road that most travelers avoided, preferring the newer interstate that bypassed this desolate stretch of nowhere. The locals called it the Dead Road, not because of accidents or tragedies, but because nothing lived here anymore. The gas stations had closed decades ago. The small towns had withered and blown away like tumbleweeds, and even the vultures seemed to have given up on finding anything worth scavenging. James Mitchell had driven this road only once before, 20 years ago, when he was a young soldier heading to his first deployment. Now, at 52, with silver threading through his dark hair and a limp that ached in cold weather, he found himself back on this same forsaken stretch of highway. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had survived 3 tours overseas, seen things that still haunted his dreams, and lost brothers in arms whose faces he could never forget. Yet here he was, driving through the American desert, feeling just as lost as he had been in those foreign lands. His truck, an old Ford that had seen better days, rumbled steadily forward. James kept one hand on the wheel while the other rested on his knee, fingers tapping an unconscious rhythm that matched the country song, playing low on the radio. He wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. After his wife passed 2 years ago and his daughter moved to the East Coast with her new husband, there wasn't much waiting for him anywhere. The small apartment he rented felt more like a storage unit than a home, and the part-time job at the hardware store barely kept his mind occupied. This drive was supposed to be therapeutic, a chance to clear his head and maybe find some peace in the vast emptiness of the desert. But peace was hard to find when your mind kept returning to all the things you'd lost. James was so deep in his thoughts that he almost didn't see them. At first, his brain registered the shapes as another mirage, a trick of the heat and the sunlight, but as he drew closer, his foot instinctively moved to the brake pedal. The truck slowed and James leaned forward, squinting through the dusty windshield. His heart began to beat faster, that old military instinct kicking in, the one that had kept him alive when others hadn't been so lucky. There, in the middle of the abandoned road, stood what could only be described as a vision from another world. A massive white horse, so large that James initially thought it must be some kind of draft horse, stood perfectly still on the cracked asphalt. But it wasn't the horse's size that made James pull over to the shoulder and cut the engine. It was what surrounded the magnificent creature. Foals, dozens of them, small and vulnerable, clustered around the giant white horse like children seeking protection from a parent. They were thin, too thin, and even from a distance James could see the exhaustion in their stance, the way they leaned against each other for support. James sat in his truck for a long moment, not quite believing what he was seeing. His military training had taught him to assess situations carefully, to not rush in without understanding what he was walking into. But his heart, the part of him that had never quite hardened despite everything he'd seen, was already pulling him out of the vehicle. The heat hit him like a physical force when he stepped onto the road. The sun was merciless here, baking everything beneath it until the very air seemed to shimmer with hostility. James walked slowly toward the herd, not wanting to startle them. As he got closer, he could see more details that made his chest tighten with a mixture of anger and sadness. The giant white horse was truly enormous, standing at least 18 hands high, with a flowing mane that cascaded down its powerful neck like a waterfall of silk. Its coat, though dusty and dirty, still gleamed with an otherworldly brilliance. This was no ordinary horse. This was the kind of animal that belonged in shows, in carefully maintained stables surrounded by people who understood its value. The foals, he counted 30 of them now, were of various colors, from deep browns to soft grays, but they all shared the same desperate look in their eyes. What kind of monster would abandon these animals out here? James stopped about 20 feet away, not wanting to crowd them. The white horse lifted its head, regarding him with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and a desperate plea. The animal didn't back away, didn't show aggression. Instead, it stood its ground, protecting the foals that pressed against its legs and flanks. James had seen that look before in the eyes of mothers in war zones, women who would die before letting harm come to their children. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and steady, the same tone he'd used to calm frightened villagers during his deployments, the same voice he'd used to soothe his wife during her final days. "Easy there, big guy. I'm not going to hurt you. None of you." The horse's ears twitched forward, listening. One of the foals, braver or perhaps more desperate than the others, took a tentative step toward James. It was a small thing, barely bigger than a large dog, with a coat the color of autumn leaves. Its ribs were visible beneath its hide, and its legs trembled with weakness. The foal made a soft, pitiful sound that cut through James like a knife. That's when James noticed the most horrifying detail of all. There was no water anywhere nearby, no food. These animals had been left here to die, abandoned on this dead road where no one would find them until it was too late. Someone had driven these beautiful creatures out here, perhaps in the middle of the night, and simply left them to whatever fate the desert had in store. James felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same anger he'd felt when confronting injustice overseas. But beneath the anger was something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was purpose. For the first time since his wife's funeral, James felt like he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. He pulled out his phone, but as expected, there was no signal this far out on the dead road. He was on his own, just him and these abandoned animals, in the middle of nowhere with the sun beating down mercilessly. James looked at his truck, calculating. He had some water in the back, emergency supplies he always carried out of old habit. It wouldn't be enough, not for 30 foals and a giant horse, but it was a start. James moved quickly back to his truck, his military training kicking in as he mentally prioritized what needed to be done. First priority was water. Dehydration would kill these animals faster than hunger, especially in this brutal heat. He grabbed the 2-gallon jugs he kept in the truck bed, along with a collapsible camping bowl he'd packed for this trip. It wasn't much, but it was something. As he returned to the horses, James noticed the way the giant white horse watched his every movement. There was intelligence in those eyes, a calculating awareness that reminded James of the bomb-sniffing dogs he'd worked with overseas. This animal understood that James might be their only chance at survival. The horse took a careful step forward, then another, moving slowly as if testing whether this human could be trusted. James knelt down on the scorching asphalt, feeling the heat through his jeans, and poured water into the bowl. The sound of liquid splashing seemed impossibly loud in the desert silence. Immediately the foals stirred, their instincts recognizing the sound of water. The small autumn-colored foal that had approached him earlier stumbled forward, nearly collapsing in its eagerness to reach the bowl. The veteran's heart broke, watching the little one drink desperately, its small body trembling with the effort. When it finished, James refilled the bowl, and another foal approached, then another. He established a rhythm, pouring and refilling, letting each foal drink its fill while the giant white horse waited patiently. James realized with growing respect that the massive animal was letting its young ones drink first, putting their needs before its own. It took nearly an hour to work through all 30 foals. Some were so weak they could barely stand, and James had to support them while they drank. His knees ached from kneeling on the hot pavement and sweat poured down his face, but he didn't stop. This was a mission now, and James Mitchell had never abandoned a mission in his life. When the last foal had drunk its fill, James stood and poured the remaining water into the bowl. He stepped back, gesturing to the white horse. For a moment, the animal didn't move, as if it couldn't quite believe this human was offering help without expecting anything in return. Then, with a dignity that seemed almost regal, the horse stepped forward and lowered its massive head to drink. James watched in awe. Up close, the horse was even more magnificent than he'd first thought. Despite the dirt and the obvious neglect, there was something noble about the creature. Something that spoke of careful breeding and a life that should have been filled with care and respect. The horse's hooves alone were the size of dinner plates, and its muscular frame suggested power that few animals could match. This wasn't just any horse. This was a champion, or should have been. Who would throw away something so valuable? Who could be so cruel? The questions burned in James's mind as he returned to his truck to assess his situation. His phone still showed no signal. He had maybe half a gallon of water left, definitely not enough to sustain this many animals for long. His own supplies of food were limited, just some protein bars and beef jerky he'd packed for the drive. He had a quarter tank of gas, enough to get back to the last town he'd passed, a place called Desert Springs that had been about 40 miles back. James stood there in the heat, running calculations in his head. If he left now, he could make it to Desert Springs, call for help, get supplies. But that would mean leaving the horses alone for hours, possibly longer. In this heat, some of the weaker foals might not survive the wait. The thought of returning to find small bodies on the hot asphalt made his stomach turn. But if he stayed, he risked running out of water himself, and then he'd be no help to anyone. The military had taught James how to make hard decisions under pressure. Sometimes there were no good options, only less terrible ones. He looked at the horses, at the way the foals had settled down near the white horse, taking shelter in its shadow. The giant animal was watching him again, those dark eyes seeming to understand his dilemma. James made his decision. He couldn't leave them, not yet. Not until he'd done everything possible to improve their situation. He spent the next hour using what he had. He poured the last of his water into the bowl and placed it in the shade of his truck. He broke up his protein bars and offered them to the foals, who sniffed at them uncertainly before hunger overcame their hesitation. It wasn't proper horse food, but it was calories, and calories meant energy, and energy meant survival. The white horse refused the food, pushing the foals forward instead with gentle nudges of its massive head. James recognized the behavior. It was the same way his squad leaders had acted overseas, making sure the younger soldiers ate first, taking the worst conditions for themselves. Leadership wasn't just a human trait, apparently. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, James sat on the tailgate of his truck, surrounded by 30 exhausted foals and one enormous white horse. The temperature was finally starting to drop, which was a mercy, but James knew the desert could be just as deadly at night. The cold could be brutal, especially for animals this weakened. He needed to make another decision, and fast. The nearest town with any real resources was Desert Springs, 40 miles back the way he'd come. But there was also the small possibility that someone might pass by on this road, though given that he hadn't seen a single vehicle in the 4 hours he'd been driving before finding the horses, that seemed unlikely. James pulled out his phone again, holding it up, turning in different directions, hoping for even a single bar of signal. Nothing. The dead road lived up to its name in more ways than one. No signal, no passing cars, no help coming from anywhere. That's when the white horse did something that James would remember for the rest of his life. The massive animal walked over to where James sat on the tailgate and gently pressed its forehead against his chest. It was a gesture of trust, of gratitude, of connection. James raised his hand slowly and placed it on the horse's broad face, feeling the warmth of its skin, the soft texture of its coat beneath the dust. In that moment, James understood something profound. He had been driving this desert road feeling lost, feeling like his life no longer had purpose or direction. And then he'd found these abandoned animals, or perhaps they'd found him. Either way, this wasn't a coincidence. This was his mission now. These horses needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed them too. James knew he had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. The sun was getting lower, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. He looked at the horses, then at his truck, then back at the horses. Every instinct told him that leaving them, even temporarily, was a risk he shouldn't take. But staying meant gambling with all their lives, including his own. He made his decision with the same clarity that had guided him through dangerous situations overseas. He would drive to Desert Springs, but he wouldn't go alone. If his truck could fit at least some of these animals, he could get them to safety while he arranged help for the others. It wasn't a perfect plan, but perfect plans were a luxury he didn't have. James walked around his truck, assessing the space. He had a standard pickup with a covered bed, nothing fancy, but it was sturdy. If he was careful, he could probably fit 8 or 9 of the smallest foals in the back. It wouldn't be comfortable, and it certainly wasn't how anyone should transport horses, but these were desperate circumstances. The challenge would be getting them loaded. James had no ramps, no proper equipment, nothing but his own strength and determination. He lowered the tailgate and stood there for a moment, trying to figure out the logistics. The foals were weak, which meant they'd be easier to lift, but it also meant he'd have to be extremely careful not to injure them further. He started with the smallest one, the autumn-colored foal that had been the first to approach him. The little one barely protested as James carefully scooped it up, cradling it against his chest like a child. The foal weighed maybe 80 pounds, but it felt heavier with the dead weight of exhaustion. James lifted it into the truck bed as gently as possible, whispering reassurances the whole time. The foal stumbled when he set it down but didn't try to jump out. It simply stood there, trembling, as if it understood that this human was trying to help. James worked quickly after that, selecting the weakest-looking foals and lifting them one by one into the truck bed. His back screamed in protest, the old injury from his service days making itself known, but he pushed through the pain. Pain was temporary. Death was permanent. By the time he'd loaded 9 foals, James was drenched in sweat and breathing hard. His arms felt like rubber, and his lower back was sending sharp signals of distress up his spine, but he wasn't done yet. He closed the tailgate carefully, making sure it was secure, then turned to face the giant white horse and the remaining 21 foals. This was the hardest part of his plan. He would have to leave them here, at least for a few hours. The thought made him sick, but there was no other option. He couldn't fit them all, and even if he could, the truck would never handle that much weight. He had to trust that they could survive a little longer while he got help. James walked up to the white horse, looking up into those intelligent eyes. He placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the dirty coat. The animal stood perfectly still, as if it were listening to every word James was about to say. "I have to leave for a little while," James said quietly, feeling foolish for talking to a horse but needing to say the words anyway. "I'm taking the little ones who are worst off. I'm going to get help, bring back water and food and people who can take care of all of you properly. I need you to watch over the others until I get back. Can you do that?" The horse's response was to lower its head slightly, almost like a nod. James knew he was probably projecting human understanding onto an animal, but he didn't care. He needed to believe that this magnificent creature understood that it would keep the remaining foals safe until he returned. James climbed into his truck, started the engine, and carefully began to drive. He kept his speed low, mindful of the precious cargo in the back. Every bump in the road made him wince, imagining the foals being jostled around. Through his rearview mirror, he could see the white horse standing in the middle of the road, growing smaller and smaller as the distance increased. The remaining foals clustered around it, and even from this distance James could see the way they pressed against the larger animal for comfort and protection. The drive to Desert Springs felt like the longest 40 miles of James's life. He kept the truck at a steady 30 miles per hour, checking his mirrors constantly to make sure the foals in the back were okay. His phone finally showed a single bar of signal when he was about 10 miles from town, and James immediately pulled over. His hands shook as he dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, James had to force himself to speak calmly and clearly. He explained the situation as concisely as possible. Abandoned horses on Route 247, approximately 30 animals, critical condition, needed immediate help. The dispatcher seemed confused at first, probably not used to getting calls about horse emergencies, but James's military bearing and clear communication style seemed to convince her this was serious. She promised to contact animal control and any local veterinarians, but warned James that it might take time to organize a rescue operation of this scale. Time. That was the one thing James didn't have. He thanked her, hung up, and continued driving toward Desert Springs. The town appeared on the horizon just as the sun was setting completely. Desert Springs was barely a town, really, just a gas station, a small general store, and a handful of houses clustered around a crossroads. But to James it looked like salvation. He pulled into the gas station, which thankfully was still open, and parked as carefully as he could. A young man in his 20s came out, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. His eyes widened when he saw James open the truck bed to reveal 9 exhausted foals. "What in the world?" the young man breathed. James didn't waste time with explanations. "I need water, as much as you can spare. These animals are dying of dehydration. And I need to know if there's a veterinarian anywhere near here." The young man, whose name tag read Danny, seemed to snap out of his shock. "Doc Martinez. She lives about 2 miles from here. She mostly does farm animals, but she'll help. Let me call her." While Danny made the call, James began watering the foals again, using a bucket Danny had brought him. The little ones drank eagerly, and James felt a small measure of relief. At least these 9 would survive. He just had to make sure the others did too. Doc Martinez arrived in less than 15 minutes, driving a battered pickup truck that had seen better days. She was a woman in her 50s, with sun-weathered skin and gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The moment she stepped out of her truck and saw the foals, her expression shifted from curious to deeply concerned. "How long have they been without water?" she asked, already moving to examine the nearest foal. "I don't know," James admitted. "I found them on Route 247 about 2 hours ago. Gave them what water I had, but it wasn't enough. There are 21 more out there, plus a giant white horse. I had to leave them to get help." Doc Martinez's jaw tightened. She ran her hands over the foal she was examining, her touch professional but gentle. "This one's severely dehydrated. They all are from the looks of it. Malnutrition too, but that's secondary right now. We need to get fluids into them immediately, and we need to get the rest before it's too late." Danny, the gas station attendant, had been listening to the conversation. "I can help," he offered. "My brother has a horse trailer. It's meant for 4 horses, but if we're careful, we might be able to fit more. And my dad has a water truck he uses for his construction business. We could fill it and bring it out to the site." James felt a surge of gratitude toward these strangers who were stepping up without hesitation. This was what he'd missed since leaving the service, this sense of people coming together for a common purpose, of a mission that mattered. How long will it take to get the trailer and the water truck? Danny checked his watch. Brother lives about 20 minutes away. Dad's truck is at the construction yard, another 15 minutes. I can have them both here in under an hour. Doc Martinez nodded approvingly. Good. James, I need you to take me to where you left the others. I want to assess their condition and start treatment immediately. Danny, when you get that water truck, follow Route 247 north. You'll see my truck and James's vehicle. Wait, James said, suddenly realizing the problem. I have these 9 in my truck. I can't leave them, and I need to go back for the others. We'll transfer them to my truck, Doc Martinez said decisively. I have crates and blankets. They'll be safe here with Danny while we handle the rescue. Danny, you keep an eye on them. Keep them watered. If any of them show signs of distress, call me immediately. The next 30 minutes were a flurry of activity. They carefully transferred the 9 foals into Doc Martinez's truck, where she'd set up a makeshift stable area in her extended bed. Each foal was placed in a cushioned crate with access to water. James watched anxiously, but Doc Martinez worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Once the foals were secured, James climbed into the passenger seat of Doc Martinez's truck and they headed back toward Route 247. The darkness had settled over the desert completely now, and the headlights cut through the blackness like searchlights. James felt his anxiety growing with each mile. He'd been gone for over 2 hours. Anything could have happened in that time. Doc Martinez seemed to sense his tension. Tell me about the white horse, she said, probably trying to distract him. James described what he'd seen, the enormous size of the animal, its protective behavior toward the foals, the intelligence in its eyes. As he talked, he saw Doc Martinez's expression change from concerned to amazed. That sounds like a Shire horse, she said quietly. They're draft horses, one of the largest breeds in the world. They can weigh over 2,000 pounds and stand 7 feet tall at the shoulder. They're gentle giants, bred for pulling heavy loads. They're also incredibly expensive and rare in this part of the country. Someone left a rare, expensive horse to die in the desert? James couldn't keep the anger out of his voice. Sounds like it, Doc Martinez said grimly. And those foals might be its offspring, or they were being transported together. Either way, someone committed a serious crime. Animal abandonment on this scale. We're talking felony charges if we can find whoever did this. They drove in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. James kept replaying the moment when the white horse had pressed its forehead against his chest, that gesture of trust and connection. He'd made a promise to that animal, even if he hadn't spoken it aloud. He'd promised to come back, to get help, to make sure they all survived. When they finally reached the spot where James had left the horses, his heart nearly stopped. The area was empty. The white horse and the remaining foals were gone. James jumped out of the truck before Doc Martinez had fully stopped, his mind racing with terrible possibilities. Had they wandered off? Had someone else come by and taken them? Had predators attacked while he was gone? He grabbed a flashlight from Doc Martinez's truck and began scanning the area frantically. "James, look!" Doc Martinez called out, pointing to the side of the road. There, just beyond the shoulder, barely visible in the flashlight beam, was the herd. The white horse had moved the foals off the pavement and into a small depression in the desert floor, a natural shelter that provided some protection from the wind. The massive animal stood at the edge of the group, clearly standing guard, its white coat almost ghostly in the darkness. When the horse saw James, it lifted its head and made a low sound, something between a whinny and a rumble. It was a sound of recognition, of relief. The horse had been waiting for him to return, just as James had asked. James felt tears prick at his eyes, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He walked slowly toward the herd, speaking softly. "I came back, just like I promised, and I brought help." Doc Martinez joined him, her veterinary bag in hand. She approached the white horse carefully, speaking in the same calm, professional tone she'd used with the foals. "Easy there, beautiful. We're here to help. We're going to take care of you and your babies." The horse allowed her to approach, standing still as she examined it with her flashlight and gentle hands. After a few minutes, Doc Martinez turned to James, her expression serious. "This horse is in better condition than the foals, but not by much. Dehydrated, undernourished, and exhausted. Plus, look at this." She directed her flashlight to the horse's legs, and James saw what she was pointing at. There were marks around the horse's ankles, evidence of ropes or chains. Someone had tied this animal up at some point, probably recently. The implications made James's blood boil. "They restrained it," Doc Martinez said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Probably to keep it from protecting the foals while they were being transported. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate cruelty." Before James could respond, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Danny arrived with both the horse trailer and the water truck, his father and brother in tow. Within minutes, they had lights set up around the area, transforming the dark desert into a makeshift rescue operation. The water truck was the priority. They filled portable troughs, and the remaining foals rushed forward to drink. The white horse waited again, watching over the little ones until they'd had their fill before approaching the water itself. The rescue operation continued through the night, lit by the headlights of multiple vehicles and portable work lights that Danny's father had brought from his construction site. The desert, so hostile during the day, had transformed into something almost cooperative under the cover of darkness. The temperature had dropped to a bearable level, and the horses seemed calmer, as if they understood that help had finally arrived. Doc Martinez worked tirelessly, examining each foal one by one. She had brought IV supplies and began administering fluids to the ones in the worst condition. James assisted her, holding the foals steady while she worked, murmuring reassurances to each small creature. Some of the foals were so weak they could barely stand, and those were the ones that worried him most. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of injured soldiers who were too far gone, who'd lost too much and didn't have enough left to fight. But Doc Martinez refused to give up on any of them. "They're fighters," she told James as she worked on a particularly small foal with a gray coat. "Young horses have incredible resilience. If we can get them through the next 24 hours, their chances improve dramatically." Danny and his family worked on loading the foals into the trailer. It was slow, careful work. The trailer was meant for 4 adult horses, but they managed to fit 12 of the smaller foals by removing the interior dividers and padding the floor with blankets. Each foal was walked up the ramp gently, with 2 people guiding it, making sure it didn't stumble or panic. James found himself constantly looking back at the white horse. The massive animal hadn't moved from its position, standing like a sentinel over the remaining foals. Even as humans worked around it, loading its charges into vehicles, the horse maintained its protective stance. There was something almost sacred about its dedication, something that reminded James of the military concept of never leaving a fallen comrade behind. When they'd loaded as many foals as the trailer could safely hold, Danny's brother, a quiet man named Miguel, spoke up. "We need to make a decision about the big one. That horse is too large for any trailer we have access to. Even if we had the right equipment, I'm not sure we could convince it to load while the other foals are still here." James looked at the white horse, then at Doc Martinez. "What if we walk it?" Everyone turned to look at him. Doc Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Walk it? That's 40 miles back to Desert Springs." "I know," James said, "but look at it. That horse isn't going to leave the foals that are still here, and we can't fit them all in one trip. If someone stays with the remaining foals until you can come back with the trailer, I could walk the horse to town. It's night, so the heat won't be an issue. We can take it slow, stop for water breaks." Doc Martinez studied James for a long moment. "You're talking about an 8 to 10 hour walk minimum, through the desert, in the dark." "I've done longer marches in worse conditions," James replied simply. It was true. He'd done 20-mile ruck marches in full gear in Afghanistan in heat that made this desert seem almost pleasant. And he'd had a reason then, a mission to complete. He had an even better reason now. Danny's father, a weathered man with kind eyes, nodded slowly. "I can stay with the remaining foals. I'll keep the water truck here, make sure they stay hydrated until you can come back for them. It's Sunday tomorrow. I wasn't planning on working anyway." Doc Martinez made her decision. "All right, James, if you're serious about this, I'll give you supplies for the walk. Water for you and the horse, some emergency food. I'll take this trailer load back to my facility, get them stabilized, and return with the trailer for the rest. If you time it right, you should reach Desert Springs around dawn." They spent the next 30 minutes preparing for the journey. Doc Martinez gave James a backpack filled with water bottles, energy bars, and a first aid kit. She also provided him with a lead rope and showed him how to properly secure it to a halter, which they carefully fitted on the white horse. The animal accepted the halter with surprising grace, as if it understood that this was necessary. "Talk to it during the walk," Doc Martinez advised. "Horses are herd animals. They need companionship. If you're walking alone with it, you become its herd. Keep a steady pace, stop every hour for water, and if it shows any signs of distress, you call me immediately." She handed him a satellite phone, the kind used by hunters and hikers in remote areas. "This will work anywhere. Don't hesitate to use it." James took the phone and nodded. He'd been on solo missions before, but never one quite like this. As the trailer pulled away with its precious cargo, and Danny's father settled in with the remaining foals, James found himself alone with the giant white horse under a sky full of stars. He checked the lead rope one more time, then looked up at the horse. In the darkness, its white coat seemed to glow with an ethereal light. "Well, big guy," James said quietly, "looks like it's just you and me now. Ready for a long walk?" The horse's response was to take a step forward, toward the road. James smiled and began walking. The horse fell into step beside him, its massive hooves making soft sounds on the asphalt. They walked in silence for the first mile, James adjusting to the horse's rhythm, the horse adjusting to having a human companion. The desert night was surprisingly beautiful. The stars were brilliant out here, away from any light pollution, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. James had forgotten how magnificent the night sky could be. In the city, in his small apartment, he'd stopped looking up. He'd stopped noticing beauty. But out here, walking beside this incredible animal, he felt something shifting inside him. "You know," James said to the horse, breaking the comfortable silence, "I was feeling pretty lost before I found you all. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. I took care of her until the end, and after she was gone, I didn't know what to do with myself. My daughter thinks I should sell the house, move closer to her, but I can't seem to make any decisions about anything." The horse's ears swiveled toward him, as if it were listening. James knew it was probably just reacting to the sound of his voice, but it felt like more than that. It felt like the horse was actually paying attention, actually caring about what he had to say. They walked through the night, the veteran and the horse. Two souls who had both been abandoned in different ways by a world that hadn't known what to do with them. James found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years. There was something about the darkness, about the steady rhythm of walking, about the patient presence beside him that loosened the words he'd kept locked inside. "I was a good soldier," James continued, his voice carrying softly in the desert air. 3 tours came home with medals and commendations. But nobody tells you about the coming home part, about how hard it is to fit back into a world that doesn't understand what you've seen. My wife, Sarah, she understood. She never pushed me to talk about things I couldn't talk about, but she was always there. Always. The horse walked steadily beside him, its breathing calm and rhythmic. James checked his watch. They'd been walking for almost 2 hours now, covering about 6 miles. Time for a water break. He found a relatively flat area just off the road and guided the horse to stop. From his backpack, he pulled out one of the collapsible bowls Doc Martinez had given him and filled it with water. The white horse drank gratefully, and James used the opportunity to check the animal over with his flashlight. The rope marks on its legs looked painful, and there were other marks too. Older scars that suggested this horse had been through more than just this one abandonment. Someone had been rough with this gentle giant, had treated it with a cruelty that made James's jaw clench with anger. "Who hurt you?" James asked softly, running his hand along the horse's neck. "Who would do this to you?" The horse finished drinking and turned its head to look at James. In the beam of the flashlight, its eyes were dark pools of intelligence and something else, something that looked almost like sadness. James had interviewed enough people during his service to recognize trauma when he saw it, even in an animal. After their water break, they continued walking. The night grew cooler, and James was grateful for the jacket he'd grabbed from his truck. The horse seemed comfortable with the temperature, its breathing steady and unlabored despite the long walk. James found himself matching his stride to the horse's, finding a rhythm that felt natural, almost meditative. Around the 4th hour of walking, as they crested a small rise in the road, James saw lights in the distance. Not the lights of a town, but something else. His military training kicked in immediately, and he slowed down, studying the lights cautiously. They appeared to be vehicle headlights, stationary, positioned in a way that suggested someone had pulled off the road. James's first instinct was to avoid contact, to lead the horse off the road and circle around whatever or whoever was up ahead. But then he remembered that they were on a rescue mission, that this horse needed to get to safety, and that avoiding help might not be the smart choice. Still, he approached carefully, keeping the horse close to him, ready to protect it if necessary. As they got closer, James could make out more details. It was a pickup truck, newer and more expensive than his own, pulled onto the shoulder. A man stood beside it, and as James and the horse came within range of the headlights, the man turned to face them. James stopped walking, his hand tightening on the lead rope. The man was in his 50s, well-dressed for the desert in expensive outdoor gear that looked like it had never actually seen hard use. His expression when he saw the white horse was one of shock and recognition. "That's my horse," the man said, his voice carrying an edge of authority that immediately put James on guard. "That's Thunder. Where did you find him?" James studied the man carefully before responding. Something about the situation felt wrong. If this was really the horse's owner, why was he out here in the middle of the night? And more importantly, why did the horse show no sign of recognition, no excitement at seeing someone it should know? "Found this horse and 30 foals abandoned on Route 247, James said, his voice neutral but firm. "Left to die in the desert heat with no water and no food. You saying this horse belongs to you?" The man's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been guilt or anger. James couldn't tell which. "There was an accident during transport. The trailer broke down, and the animals got loose. I've been searching for them all day." It was a lie. James had spent enough time interrogating prisoners and interviewing witnesses to recognize deception when he heard it. The details were too vague, the explanation too convenient. And most damning of all, the horse showed no positive reaction to this man. If anything, the animal seemed to tense up, its ears flattening slightly against its head. If your trailer broke down, where is it? James asked calmly. And why are you alone? If you were transporting 30 foals and a horse this size, you'd need a commercial rig and probably help. Where's your crew? The man's jaw tightened. I don't appreciate your tone. I'm the legal owner of this animal and I'm taking it back. Now hand over that lead rope. James didn't move. Every instinct he had was screaming that this man was bad news, that letting him take the horse would be a terrible mistake. But legally, if this man could prove ownership, James might not have a choice. He needed to buy time, needed to think this through. I'm happy to hand the horse over to its legal owner, James said carefully. But first I'm going to need to see proof of ownership. Registration papers, bill of sale, something official. This horse was found abandoned, which is a crime. Before I hand it over to anyone, I need to make sure they're legitimately the owner and not the person who committed the crime. The man's face reddened. I don't have papers on me. They're at my ranch. But I'm telling you, this is my horse. I paid good money for it, and I want it back now. James shook his head slowly. No papers, no horse. This animal is currently under the protection of the local veterinarian who's treating it and the foals for severe dehydration and malnutrition. If you're the owner, you can contact Doc Martinez in Desert Springs and provide proof of ownership to her. Until then, I'm continuing to walk this horse to safety. The man took a step forward, his hand moving toward his belt. James's military training took over instantly. He shifted his position, placing himself between the man and the horse, his posture changing from friendly to defensive in a heartbeat. I wouldn't do that, James said quietly, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had faced down far more dangerous men than this one. I'm a veteran and I'm not afraid of you. This horse needs medical care, and I'm getting it to safety. If you try to stop me, I will defend myself and this animal. Your choice. The tension between the two men hung heavy in the desert air. The stranger's hand had frozen at his belt, and James could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This wasn't a man used to being challenged, but he was also smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. James stood his ground, every muscle in his body ready to react if necessary, while the white horse remained perfectly still beside him, as if it too were waiting to see how this confrontation would end. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, the man's hand moved away from his belt. He held both hands up in a gesture of surrender, but his expression was filled with barely contained rage. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. That horse is valuable property, and when I prove ownership, there will be consequences for anyone who kept it from me. James didn't flinch. Looking forward to it, Doc Martinez's office is in Desert Springs. You know where to find us. He waited, maintaining eye contact, until the man finally turned and walked back to his truck. The engine roared to life and the vehicle peeled out onto the highway, heading in the opposite direction, back toward where James had found the horses. As soon as the taillights disappeared into the darkness, James let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline coursing through his system. He'd been in firefights that had felt less intense than that confrontation. At least in combat, you knew who the enemy was and what they wanted. This felt more sinister, more complicated. He turned to the white horse, which was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. That man, James said quietly, he's the one who hurt you, isn't he? The one who left you in those foals to die. The horse's only response was to step closer to James, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from its massive body. It was an answer in itself. The animal trusted James more than it had trusted that man, and that told James everything he needed to know about who the real criminal was here. James pulled out the satellite phone Doc Martinez had given him and dialed her number. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice alert despite the late hour. James, everything okay? Not exactly, James said, and quickly explained the encounter with the stranger. Doc Martinez listened without interrupting, and when James finished, she was quiet for a moment. "That's concerning," she finally said. "Very concerning. But legally, without proof that he abandoned the animals, and without proof that you didn't steal his horse, this could get complicated. The good news is that he doesn't have the horse right now, and possession is 9/10 of the law. The bad news is that if he can prove ownership, we might have to return the animal to him." "Even if he's the one who abandoned it?" James felt his anger rising again. "Even then, animal cruelty is hard to prove, especially if there are no witnesses, but don't worry, I'm going to make some calls. I have contacts with the state police and animal welfare organizations. If this man is who I think he might be, we might already have a file on him. Just get that horse to safety and we'll worry about the legal issues later." James thanked her and ended the call. He looked down the dark road ahead, then back at the horse. "Looks like we've got more trouble ahead than I thought," he told the animal, "but I made you a promise and I'm going to keep it, no matter what it takes." They resumed their walk, but James found himself more alert now, constantly scanning the darkness for any sign of returning headlights. The encounter had reminded him that this wasn't just a simple rescue operation anymore. There were people who saw these animals as property, as investments, who didn't care about their suffering as long as they could turn a profit. It was a different kind of enemy than the ones he'd faced in combat, but an enemy nonetheless. The hours passed slowly. James continued to talk to the horse, partly to stay awake, and partly because the conversation, one-sided as it was, helped him process what was happening. He told the horse about his time in the military, about the friends he'd lost, about the guilt that still kept him awake some nights. He talked about Sarah, about how they'd met at a veterans support group, how she'd been the one person who could reach through his walls and find the man he'd been before the war. "She used to say that I saved lives," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "But really, she was the one who saved me. When she got sick, I felt so helpless. All that training, all that experience, and I couldn't do anything to stop the cancer from taking her away. I haven't felt useful since she died. Haven't felt like I had a purpose." The horse made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and James found himself smiling despite the tears that had started to fall. "But finding you all today, that felt like purpose. Like maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As they walked through their 6th hour together, James noticed the sky beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming, and with it, the end of their journey. In the distance, he could make out the lights of Desert Springs, still several miles away but getting closer with each step. The horse seemed to sense that they were nearing their destination. Its pace picked up slightly, and there was an energy in its movement that hadn't been there before. Or maybe James was imagining it, projecting his own feelings of relief and accomplishment onto the animal. Either way, they were almost there. James checked his watch. It was nearly 5 in the morning. They'd been walking for close to 8 hours, covering almost 35 miles. His feet ached, his back was screaming, and he was so tired he could barely think straight. But they'd made it. Against all odds, through the darkness and the confrontation and the endless miles of empty desert, they'd made it. As the first rays of sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, James led the white horse into Desert Springs. A few early risers were already up, and they stopped to stare at the sight of the exhausted veteran leading an enormous white horse down the main street. James didn't care about the stairs. He had only one destination in mind. Doc Martinez's veterinary clinic was at the end of town, a modest building with a large fenced area behind it. As they approached, James could see movement inside. Doc Martinez must have been watching for them. She came out of the building, and her expression when she saw them was a mixture of relief and amazement. "You actually did it," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You walked that horse 40 miles through the desert in one night." James managed a tired smile. "We walked it together," he corrected. "How are the foals?" Doc Martinez's expression became more serious as she gestured for James to follow her. "Most of them are stable. I've got them in the recovery barn out back on IV fluids and being monitored constantly. But I'm not going to lie to you, James. 3 of them are in critical condition. They were just too far gone when we got to them. I've done everything I can, but the next few hours will tell us whether they make it." James felt his heart sink. He'd been so focused on getting the white horse to safety that he hadn't allowed himself to think about the possibility that some of the foals might not survive. As they walked around to the back of the clinic, he kept the lead rope slack, letting the white horse set the pace. The massive animal seemed drawn toward the barn, as if it could sense that the foals were inside. The recovery barn was a large structure with individual stalls lining both sides and a central walkway. As soon as they entered, James could hear the soft sounds of the foals moving in their stalls, the occasional whinny, the rustle of hay. The white horse stopped in its tracks, its head lifting, ears swiveling as it listened to the sounds of its charges. "They're all here," Doc Martinez said softly. "All 30 of them. Miguel made another trip about 2 hours ago and brought in the last group. Your friend with the water truck stayed until every single foal was loaded and safe." The relief that washed over James was so intense it almost brought him to his knees. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd saved every single one. Even if some were still fighting for their lives, they were here, they were getting care, and they had a chance. Doc Martinez led the white horse to an extra-large stall at the end of the barn. It had clearly been prepared specifically for this animal, with fresh hay, multiple water buckets, and enough space for the enormous horse to move around comfortably. But as they tried to guide the horse into the stall, it resisted, planting its massive hooves and refusing to move forward. "It's okay," James said, trying to coax the animal forward. "You're safe now. You need to rest." But the white horse had other ideas. It pulled away from the stall entrance and began walking down the central aisle of the barn, stopping at each stall to look inside. James and Doc Martinez exchanged glances and decided to let the animal do what it needed to do. The horse moved methodically from stall to stall, checking on each foal. When it reached the stalls containing the 3 critical cases, it lingered longer, lowering its head over the door and making soft sounds. The foals inside, weak as they were, responded to its presence, struggling to stand or at least lift their heads in acknowledgement. "I've never seen anything like this," Doc Martinez whispered to James. "It's like a parent checking on their children after a disaster. The level of intelligence and emotional awareness this animal is displaying is extraordinary." James watched the white horse with growing respect and understanding. This wasn't just any horse. This was a leader, a protector, an animal that had taken responsibility for those 30 foals and refused to abandon them even when doing so would have given it a better chance of survival. The rope marks on its legs suddenly made more sense. Someone had tried to separate this horse from the foals, had tried to prevent it from protecting them, and it had fought back. After the white horse had checked on every single foal, it finally allowed itself to be led back to the large stall. But even as it entered, it positioned itself so it could see down the aisle, maintaining visual contact with as many of the foals as possible. Only then did it begin to drink from the water buckets, taking long, deep drinks that spoke of its desperate thirst. Doc Martinez examined the horse while it drank, running her hands over its body, checking its vital signs, looking at the various wounds and marks. Dehydration, malnutrition, multiple contusions and abrasions, rope burns, and signs of sustained stress, she cataloged. But overall, this horse is in remarkably good condition considering what it's been through. It must have been giving most of its energy to protecting the foals rather than taking care of itself. James helped Doc Martinez treat the rope burns and other wounds. applying salves and bandages while the horse stood patiently. As they worked, James told her about the confrontation on the road, about the man who had claimed ownership of the horse. "I think I know who that might be," Doc Martinez said grimly. "There's a man named Victor Hargrove who runs a breeding operation about 60 miles from here. He's been investigated multiple times for animal welfare violations, but he's got expensive lawyers and political connections, so nothing ever sticks. He specializes in rare and expensive breeds, sells them to wealthy collectors who don't know or don't care about the conditions the animals are kept in." "And you think this horse came from his operation?" James asked. "I'd bet money on it. Shire horses like this one are incredibly valuable. A well-bred Shire can sell for $50,000 or more. Those foals, if they're purebred or even mixed with quality stock, could be worth several thousand each. We're looking at potentially $500,000 in horses that were just abandoned to die." The numbers made James's head spin. Why would someone abandon that much money? Doc Martinez's expression was dark. Because sometimes the cost of keeping animals alive and healthy exceeds their value. If Hargrove was facing financial troubles, or if these animals had health issues that would hurt their resale value, he might have decided it was easier to just get rid of them and claim an insurance loss. Happens more often than you'd think in the exotic animal trade. The thought made James sick. He looked at the white horse, now eating hay from a feeder, its movements slow and deliberate. This magnificent creature, these innocent foals, had been treated as nothing more than balance sheet items, disposable assets that could be eliminated when they became inconvenient. "We need to make sure he doesn't get them back," James said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Doc Martinez nodded. "I've already called the State Animal Welfare Division. They're sending an investigator out tomorrow. In the meantime, these animals are under veterinary hold, which means legally they can't be removed without my approval. But James, you need to understand something. If Hargrove can prove ownership and there's no evidence of deliberate abandonment, the law might force me to return them to him." "Then we need to find evidence," James said. "There has to be something. Tire tracks at the site where I found them, witnesses, records of his operation, something." A young woman in scrubs appeared in the doorway of the barn. "Doc Martinez, the small gray foal in stall 7 is crashing, heart rate's dropping." Doc Martinez was moving before the woman finished speaking, James right behind her. They reached the stall to find one of the weakest foals lying on its side, breathing rapidly and shallowly. Doc Martinez immediately began working, checking vitals, adjusting the IV, doing everything in her power to stabilize the small creature. James felt helpless as he watched. He'd faced enemy fire with more calm than he felt watching this tiny foal struggle for life. Behind him, he heard a sound and turned to see the white horse at its stall door, watching intently. The massive animal's eyes were fixed on the struggling foal, and it made a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo through the barn. The next 20 minutes felt like hours as Doc Martinez worked frantically to save the gray foal. James stood back, giving her room to work, but unable to look away. He'd seen death before, had held dying men in his arms and whispered comfort as their lives slipped away. But this was different. This was an innocent creature that had done nothing to deserve the suffering it had endured, and the injustice of it burned in his chest like acid. The white horse continued to watch from its stall, making occasional sounds that seemed to fluctuate between encouragement and mourning. James wondered if the animal understood what was happening, if it comprehended that one of its charges was slipping away despite all their efforts. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the foal's breathing began to stabilize. Its heart rate came back up to a more normal rhythm, and some color returned to its gums. Doc Martinez sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "That was close," she said, her voice shaky. Too close. We're not out of the woods yet, but it's responding to treatment. The next few hours will be critical. James felt relief wash over him so intensely that he had to lean against the stall door for support. Behind him, the white horse made a sound that could only be described as a sigh of relief, as if it too understood that the crisis had passed, at least for now. As Doc Martinez continued to monitor the foal, James noticed the sun had fully risen. Through the barn's windows, he could see Desert Springs coming to life, people starting their day, unaware of the drama that had unfolded through the night. He realized with a start that he'd been awake for over 24 hours, running on nothing but adrenaline and determination. "You need to rest," Doc Martinez told him, as if reading his thoughts. "There's a cot in my office. Get a few hours of sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes with the foals or if the investigator arrives." James wanted to protest, wanted to say he was fine, but his body betrayed him with a jaw-cracking yawn. "What about the white horse?" "I'll keep an eye on him. Go rest, James. You've earned it." James took one last look at the white horse, which seemed to nod at him, as if giving him permission to rest. He stumbled to Doc Martinez's office, barely making it to the cot before exhaustion claimed him. He woke to the sound of raised voices. For a moment, disoriented and groggy, James thought he was back in Afghanistan, that the yelling was coming from a combat situation. But as his mind cleared, he recognized one of the voices as Doc Martinez's, tight with controlled anger. The other voice was male, authoritative, and familiar. James sat up, his body protesting every movement. According to the clock on the wall, he'd been asleep for 4 hours. He stood and made his way toward the sound of the argument, which was coming from the front reception area of the clinic. The man from the desert road stood in the lobby, dressed now in an expensive suit that seemed absurdly out of place in the rural veterinary clinic. He was accompanied by another man in a cheaper suit who carried a briefcase. Standing between them and the door to the treatment area was Doc Martinez, her arms crossed and her expression fierce. "I don't care what papers you have," Doc Martinez was saying as James entered the room. "These animals are under medical hold due to their condition. They're not going anywhere until they're fully recovered." The man in the expensive suit, who James now assumed was Victor Hargrove, turned cold eyes toward Doc Martinez. "I have ownership papers right here," he said, gesturing to the man with the briefcase. "Those are my animals, purchased legally, and you have no right to keep them from me." "I have every right," Doc Martinez shot back. "Under state law, a veterinarian can place a medical hold on any animal in their care if moving that animal would endanger its health. All 30 of those foals are severely malnourished and dehydrated. 3 are still in critical condition. Moving them now could kill them." Hargrove's jaw tightened. "Then I'll wait until they're stable and take them then. But I want daily updates on their condition, and I want access to see my property." "Your property," James said, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to him as he stepped fully into the room. "You mean the animals you abandoned to die on Route 247? The ones you left without water or food in the desert heat?" Hargrove's expression shifted to one of calculated innocence. "I already explained to you last night. There was a transport accident. The animals got loose. I've been searching for them since it happened." "Really?" James said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Then you won't mind showing us the broken-down trailer and explaining why there are rope burns on that white horse's legs, and why none of the animals showed any sign of recognizing you when you tried to claim them last night." The lawyer stepped forward. "My client doesn't have to explain anything to you. We have documentation proving ownership. Unless you can prove these animals were abandoned, they remain my client's legal property." Before James could respond, the door to the clinic opened and a woman in her 40s entered, wearing a state investigator's badge. "I'm Sarah Chen from the State Animal Welfare Division," she announced. I'm here about a report of animal abandonment involving 30 foals and a Shire horse. The room erupted into chaos as everyone tried to speak at once. The investigator held up her hand for silence, her eyes moving from person to person, assessing the situation with the practiced calm of someone used to dealing with contentious cases. "One at a time," she said firmly. "Let's start with the veterinarian. Dr. Martinez, can you show me the animals in question?" As Doc Martinez led the investigator toward the barn, Hargrove and his lawyer tried to follow. The investigator turned and stopped them with a look. "You'll have your chance to speak. Right now I need to assess the animal's condition without interference." James followed at a distance, close enough to hear but not close enough to interfere. He watched as Investigator Chen examined each foal, taking photographs, making notes, asking Doc Martinez detailed questions about their conditions when they arrived and the treatment they'd received. When they reached the white horse's stall, Chen stopped and stared. The massive animal regarded her calmly, and James could have sworn he saw intelligence in its eyes, as if the horse understood that this person might be the key to its future. "This is a Shire horse," Chen said, more to herself than anyone else. "Purebred from the looks of it, worth a fortune." She examined the rope burns on its legs, taking multiple photographs from different angles. "These injuries are recent, within the last week, I'd say." Doc Martinez nodded. "That's my assessment as well. And look at this." She showed the investigator other marks on the horse's body, evidence of rough handling and neglect. Chen's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. When they'd completed the examination of all the animals, she turned to Doc Martinez. "I'm placing an official hold on these animals pending investigation. No one, including the claimed owner, is to remove them from your facility without written authorization from my office." They returned to the lobby where Hargrove and his lawyer waited, their expressions confident, as if they already knew how this would end. But Investigator Chen's face told a different story. She looked at Hargrove with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen this situation play out too many times before. "Mr. Hargrove," she began, her voice professional but hard, "I have some questions for you. You claim these animals were lost due to a transport accident. Can you provide me with the location of this accident, the name of your transport company, and any documentation of the incident?" Hargrove's lawyer started to speak, but Chen cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm asking your client, counselor, Mr. Hargrove." For the first time, James saw uncertainty flicker across Hargrove's face. "The trailer was removed already. I had it towed to a repair shop." "Which shop?" Chen asked, pulling out a notebook. "I'd have to check my records." "Please do. I'll need that information within the next 2 hours." Chen flipped through her notes. "I'll also need to visit your breeding facility. Today, if possible. I want to see the conditions where these animals were kept before the alleged accident." The color drained from Hargrove's face. "That's not necessary. I have all the proper permits and licenses." "Then you won't mind showing them to me?" Chen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Hargrove, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen every excuse, every cover story, every attempt to explain away animal neglect and abuse. Those horses weren't lost in an accident. They were deliberately abandoned. The evidence is all over their bodies, and I'm going to prove it." Hargrove's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove anything. It's my word against a homeless drifter and a rural veterinarian with a savior complex." "Actually," James said quietly, "you're wrong about that. I'm not homeless, and I'm not a drifter. I'm a decorated combat veteran with 3 tours overseas and an impeccable service record. And I documented everything from the moment I found those horses. Times, locations, the condition of the animals, everything. I also have the satellite phone records showing when I called for help and what I reported." Doc Martinez stepped forward. And I have detailed medical records showing the exact condition each animal was in when they arrived at my facility. Severe dehydration takes days to develop, Mr. Hargrove. Those animals weren't lost for a few hours. They'd been without adequate food and water for at least 3 or 4 days. Chen nodded, making notes. Add to that the physical evidence of rope burns and other injuries consistent with rough handling, and we have a compelling case for animal cruelty and abandonment. Mr. Hargrove, I'm officially notifying you that you're under investigation. These animals will remain in Dr. Martinez's custody until this investigation is complete. If you're found guilty, you'll face criminal charges, substantial fines, and you'll be permanently barred from owning or operating any animal-related business in this state. Hargrove's lawyer tried one last time. This is harassment. My client has rights. And so do those animals, Chen said sharply. This conversation is over. Mr. Hargrove, you'll be hearing from my office. Don't leave the state. After Hargrove and his lawyer left, the tension in the room slowly dissipated. Chen turned to James and Doc Martinez with a genuine smile. That was some good work you two did. Most people would have driven right past those horses. You saved their lives. Ooh. James shook his head. I just did what anyone should do. But most people don't, Chen said gently. Most people look the other way. You didn't. She turned to Doc Martinez. Keep detailed records of everything. I'll be building a case, and I'll need all the documentation you can provide. If this goes to trial, I may need both of you to testify. We'll be there, James said without hesitation. Over the following weeks, James found himself spending more and more time at Doc Martinez's clinic. At first, he told himself he was just checking on the horses, making sure they continued to recover. But the truth was, he'd found something at that clinic, something he'd been missing since Sarah died. He'd found purpose. The foals recovered slowly but steadily. All 30 of them survived, even the 3 critical cases that had nearly been lost. They grew stronger each day, their coats becoming shinier, their eyes brighter, their movements more energetic. Doc Martinez said it was the best recovery she'd ever witnessed, a testament to the resilience of young animals when given proper care. The white horse, which James had started calling Thunder after its powerful presence, became a local celebrity. News of the rescue had spread through Desert Springs and beyond, and people came from miles around to see the magnificent Shire horse that had protected 30 foals against impossible odds. Thunder seemed to take the attention in stride, maintaining its dignified bearing while allowing visitors to approach and even pet its massive neck. James discovered that he had a natural talent for working with the horses. Doc Martinez taught him the basics of horse care, and he found the work meditative, healing in ways he hadn't expected. The simple acts of feeding, grooming, and caring for these animals filled a void he hadn't known how to address. 2 months after the rescue, Investigator Chen called with news. The case against Hargrove was solid. She'd found evidence of multiple violations at his breeding facility, including inadequate housing, insufficient food and water, and records showing he'd been facing bankruptcy. The horses had been abandoned to avoid the cost of caring for them, with Hargrove planning to claim an insurance loss. He was facing multiple felony charges and would never work with animals again. More importantly, Chen had arranged for the horses to be legally seized and put up for adoption through a rescue organization. Thunder and the 30 foals would never have to return to Hargrove. On the day the adoption paperwork was finalized, James stood in the barn with Doc Martinez, watching Thunder interact with the foals. The massive horse had become a father figure to all of them, and they followed it everywhere, seeking comfort and guidance. I've been thinking, James said slowly, about what comes next for them, for all of them. Doc Martinez smiled as if she'd been waiting for this moment. And I want to adopt Thunder, and I want to help place the foals in good homes where they'll be loved and cared for properly. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Doc Martinez said. "But where will you keep a 2,000-pound Shire horse?" James pulled out his phone and showed her a listing he'd been looking at. It was a small ranch just outside Desert Springs, with enough land for horses and room to grow. "I've been thinking about that too, about putting down roots here, about building something that matters." Doc Martinez's eyes misted over. "Sarah would be proud of you." James felt tears on his own cheeks. "I think she would be. I think she'd say I finally found my way home." In the end, all 30 foals found loving homes carefully selected by James and Doc Martinez to ensure each animal would be cherished. Thunder remained with James on the small ranch that became known as Second Chance Stables, a refuge for abandoned and neglected horses. James never forgot that night on the dead road when he'd found purpose in the most unexpected place. The white horse and 30 foals had saved him just as surely as he'd saved them, giving him a reason to wake up each morning, a mission that mattered, and proof that sometimes the greatest rescues are the ones where everyone involved is saved.